Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you to this special broadcast on Salam Media this evening with myself, Inayat Wadi. And if we have been following developments recently, we've seen South Africa come under severe fire, particularly from the United States of America, facing economic coercion for asserting its sovereignty. Now, there are a number of organizations calling for the expulsion of the United States of America from the United Nations. And if we have been following developments, we've seen the Trinity of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Afriforum aimed at derailing land reform in South Africa. And also at the same time, looking at some of the statements that Donald Trump has been making, and clearly total disregard for South Africa. And again, looking at the focus on the South African government, but more importantly, looking at the Afrikaners in South Africa, and Donald Trump saying that they are welcome in the United States of America as refugees. Now, this has been a major talking point. It's been a major debating point in South Africa, where Trump had actually singled out the Afrikaners as victims of racial prejudice. He also railed against the South African government's policy of favoring blacks over whites. There's talk about employment, education, business policies as well, which he said were introduced at the end of apartheid in 1994. And the whole land debate is now starting to surface. And Elon Musk, again, someone who was born in South Africa, he's become a major talking point as well, who already now is being claimed as the richest man in the world. But again, looking at his association with Donald Trump, and executive order after executive order being signed by Donald Trump at this point in time. And on the African continent, the target has been South Africa. And this is what we're going to unpack tonight with my panelists this evening. We've got Shahid Bolsen, Geopolitical Analyst, founder of Middle Nation and leader of the Article 6 campaign. We've got Nisa Bardien, political commentator, activist, and key speaker at the Middle Nation, leads the activist teams and advocates for global justice. We've got Imane Laymoonti, political commentator and key speaker at Middle Nation, specializing in global politics and justice. Taufeeq G, founder of PSGGF, activist and National Secretary General of the Truth and Solidarity Party, United for Justice in South Africa. And in a little while, we'll be joined by Fairouz Binti'Sadik, Nagia, state law advisor, activist United for Justice in South Africa. Now, I've seen 4 of the 5 panelists this evening are on screen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you. Welcome to the show, and your time is much appreciated this evening on Salam Media.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, in fact, Nisa, I'd actually like to begin with you because, just looking at it from a South African perspective and looking at South Africa, we have our own policies. We've got domestic policies. We've got foreign policies as well. And just looking at what has been playing out, the whole question surrounding land expropriation, and also in terms of white farm murders, land grabs, all of this has now become a major talking point. And just to paint an overall picture, or as a matter of introduction, just to provide some context to this discussion that we are having this evening, and more importantly, why is Donald Trump making the statements that he is regarding South Africa and land reform?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you so much for your time and for giving us the opportunity to speak about this critical subject this evening. I think we need to begin with the fact that is United States weaponizing aid to control South Africa and, their domestic policy specifically. So a few days after declaring that the United States is taking ownership of Gaza, President Donald Trump signed an executive order imposing sanctions on South Africa, and he tied it to South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. But let's be real, this is just another attempt at neo-colonial control, and it's wrapped in misinformation and fear-mongering. The United States funds just about 17% of South Africa's HIV/AIDS program, and nothing more really. So that's the full extent of the so-called financial aid. So when Trump stopped that funding, it showed that this was never about human rights in the first place. It is about control. Yet the United States has a long, well-documented history of using financial aid as a weapon, particularly in Africa. And it's a classic tactic from them. When a country's policies don't align with their interests, the purse strings tighten. So Trump's executive order also cited, like you mentioned, land grabs, race-based laws, while providing refugee status to Afrikaners due to the white farm murders. And their reasoning are based on deliberate lies, not just exaggerations, which are designed to provoke international intervention in our country. And the proof of this is that Afriforum and Afrikaners stated that they are not willing to leave South Africa after they've been given refugee status. That is not what they want. They want the United States to assist them, to remain in the country. And at the end of the day, nobody's asking them to leave in the first place. Like I said, these are lies. So Trump and Musk's interference in South Africa's domestic policy violates a number of principles of the United Nations Charter. For example, sovereign equality, Article 2, Clause 1. South Africa has the right to govern itself without external interference. US sanctions directly undermine this principle. The second example is non-intervention, Article 2, Clause 7. No country has the right to interfere in another nation's internal affairs. So United States actions goes against South Africa. South Africa is a clear violation of this fundamental rule. And my last example is self-determination. Article 1, Clause 2 of the United Nations Charter. The South African people have the right, just like any other member state, to determine their own political and economic future. The United States seeks to dictate policies that serve their own interests and not those of South Africans. And it's more specifically aimed at Musk and Trump. It's the government that seeks their interests within our borders.
Yes, Nisa, in fact, just staying with you and also just to provide some context into why South Africa is obviously implementing the Land Expropriation Act. Now, we've heard Donald Trump talk about this. He spoke about South Africa confiscating land and doing things worse than that. And also at the same time, this has been endorsed by people like Afriforum, where we've heard them talking about land being confiscated, Zimbabwean style. There is mass politically motivated murder of white farmers. All of this actually playing out. And again, to understand why is South Africa doing it? Because we know at this point in time, South Africa is one of the most unequal societies on the continent.
100%. Just a little bit of context, like the Land Expropriation Act is not a reckless land grab. It's a legal process aimed at correcting centuries of historical injustice, which is rooted in colonialism and then apartheid. So it replaces the outdated 1975 Expropriation Act, meaning that this was already in existence. We are just updating what has been there already. So the goal is to ensure that land serves the public good. It's not for just anybody's use. Anybody can go and just go take a piece of land. It's for the public good and not just for a privileged few. So let's set the record straight. Like I said, this isn't a free for all. My cousin can't just walk over to a neighbor's house, kick them out and claim it as their own. That's not how this works. Unlike what's happening in Palestine right now, where settlers are forcibly removing families with military backing, South Africa's land reform follows a strict legal process. It only applies to underutilized or unused land that's needed for public benefit. Think housing, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. Now, this legislation wasn't rushed or it isn't forced through. It's been in the making for over a decade, shaped by extensive legal debate, economic stability, fairness, and due process. The law signed by President Cyril Ramaphosa provides clear guidelines to ensure expropriation is transparent, it's justified, and it serves our people. So how does it actually work? For example, land can only be expropriated in the public interest, and meaning it must serve a broader societal need. It needs to be low-cost housing, RDP housing, roads, schools, healthcare facilities, and the process must start with negotiation. And the government must engage that landowner and attempt to reach a fair agreement. So that already strikes out just arbitrarily, grabbing land. It doesn't make sense. When the law states there must be a negotiation first. And if no agreement is reached, mediation follows. And if mediation fails, then the case will then go to court, ensuring that all expropriations are lawful and justified. So the fact that Trump is pushing this narrative and Musk is pushing this narrative, they have not read the act in the first place, because contrary to what they are spreading online because of their influence, it's the direct opposite of what the act says in any case. Any layman can just understand it just by reading the act. It's not even a 30-page act that they need to go and see what is the what is happening with this legislation brought into place. So what it does not do, it does not allow for land grabs. It does not strip landowners of property without legal oversight. And it does not unfairly target white landowners. I'm going to give you an example why I can prove that it's not just white people or white landowners that will be affected. My family owns some land in Tsitsikama on the Garden Road. And when they needed to build a national road which joins between Port Elizabeth and Cape Town, they went to the landowners, they came to the family trust, and they went into negotiations and asked if they could build that national road through the property. They didn't just come and just start building. They made that agreement. Another example with the same area is they built RDP houses. They engaged the family because it's a large family trust with, that's been coming on for quite a bit of time. And they went into negotiations before they just started building and creating infrastructure on this land. So let's talk about other facts. According to a 2017 land audit by the South African government, white South Africans, who make up just about 7.8% of the population, own about 72% of the country's individually owned farmland. Meanwhile, black South Africans, who make up 80% of the population, own only 4%. Now, this staggering imbalance is a direct legacy of apartheid and colonialism, systems designed to concentrate land and wealth in the hands of a white minority. Now, the Land Expropriation Act seeks to correct this imbalance, not by seizing land just because, but by ensuring it serves the public good. And let's also be clear, the law specifically applies to land that is unused and underutilized. So at its core, the reform is about fairness, it's about justice and a shared future, one where South Africa's land serves all its people and not just a privileged few.
Yes, Nisa, in fact, I'm going to come back to you just now, and I just needed to obviously talk to you about farm murders and those type of things as well, because that is used as a justification. But I'd like to bring Shahid Bolsen into the discussion. Shahid, as Nisa pointed out, financial aid being utilized as a weapon, and this soft power aggression by the United States of America, and you followed developments. I think the last time you and I had a discussion, we spoke about the government of national unity. But here we see now blatant, clear interference in South Africa's domestic policy. And looking at a country like South Africa, how should South Africa actually be seeing what the soft power aggression is about, but more importantly, responding?
Well, look, I mean, let's be clear. When the United States, in 2025, when the United States resorts to sanctions or financial coercion, economic coercion, propaganda campaigns, and so forth against a country like South Africa, the truth is it's not acting from a position of strength. I think it's very important to remember this. These are the tactics of a declining empire that's trying to maintain control. It's not these are not the actions of a confident superpower that's trying to secure its dominance. This soft power aggression, whether it's freezing aid, economic pressure through sanctions and so forth, or a disinformation campaign like what Sister Nisa is talking about, this is designed to create division within your society. It's designed to undermine your leadership's credibility and ultimately to try to force you into submission, a kind of submission that you don't need to be forced into. It only works if you let it. This is the reality. I think South Africa has to recognize that these measures are not a reflection of your weakness, but it's a reflection of your strategic importance. You're being targeted because you have the potential in South Africa to be a leader in Africa, to be an independent force, as has been proved with your actions at the ICJ. You can be a force against the exploitative dynamics of the global economic system. This is why Washington feels the need to try to contain you. So what should South Africa do, you ask? What should the response be? Well, economic self-sufficiency has to be a priority. You have to reduce your dependence on American trade. You have to reduce your dependence on the American banking institutions, Western financial systems, and so on. You need to deepen your ties with alternative partners, like, of course, obviously BRICS is an obvious avenue for that. But beyond that, you have to explore stronger relationships across the global South and within African regional alliances, as well as obviously with Asia and the Middle Eastern countries, the GCC and so on, countries that share your interest in independence from Western hegemony. Second, and I think this is very important, you should call America's bluff. If they cut aid, then just restructure your economy to function without it. Like Nisa said, it's not that important what they're giving. If they impose sanctions, then leverage that as an opportunity to develop internal industries. If they weaponize trade, okay, diversify your markets. There's no law that says that South Africa must remain in an economic relationship with America where it's always on the receiving end of coercion. You don't have to do that. And third, I would say you need to turn their soft power aggression into your strength. Expose their hypocrisy. Expose the hypocrisy. Take their own language of human rights and democracy and fairness and so forth, and use it to highlight their own violations. The violations of the UN Charter, like Sister said. Challenge their whole narrative on all international forums, like at the UN. Align with other nations that have suffered similar treatment by at the hands of the United States, whether it's Venezuela or Iran or Russia or China, and on and on and on. There's no limit. There's no end of the countries that have suffered. The US does not have the ability to actually control South Africa unless South Africa allows itself to be controlled. Their economic threats only have power if you remain within the structures that make you vulnerable to those threats. You know, if you step outside of that system, then suddenly all of their weapons of coercion lose their impact. You understand? So the answer is to resist, to reform, and to realign. The era of blindly submitting to American pressure is over, in my opinion. South Africa has the power, in fact, to chart its own course. It has the will, or it has the ability. The question is whether or not it has the will to do so. But I think that there's a lot you can do. And I think that you should take a position of what you can call strategic indifference to what America is doing. Because like I said, you have to bear in mind that these actions that they're taking actually reflect an empire that is in decline and that is in retreat. So don't take their threat so seriously, because the truth of the matter is, anyway, in my opinion, they are withholding aid because they can't afford it. They're coming up with a reason. They're coming up with their own rationale. They're coming up with their own justification that serves their domestic. I mean, think about what he's saying. On the one hand, he's saying that the land is being expropriated unjustly. But rather than saying that we want those, you know, supposedly, according to their narrative, rather than saying we want those white farmers to keep their land and so forth, he's saying, come to America. In other words, you don't care about them having the land. It's not even about them. You're saying, go ahead and leave South Africa, which just makes it easier to take their land according to the narrative that you're propagating. So you're not actually interested in trying to keep so-called white farmers on their land. That's not, by your own narrative, it's contradictory when you're also saying that they can come to the United States as refugees. You understand? There's a contradiction in their own narrative, which means that what you're really opposed to is South Africa determining themselves what to do with their own land for the benefit of their own people. What you're objecting to is their exercising of their sovereignty. But in fact, like I said, and like what Sister Nisa was talking about, the amount of money that you are depriving South Africa of is not sufficient to actually cause them to capitulate. There's no reason whatsoever that South Africa should take this threat seriously, because it's a hollow threat. Thank you.
Yes, Shahid. In fact, also, you talk about the Afrikaner farmers telling them to come to America, but he says, come to America as refugees. Okay. And this obviously speaks volumes on its own in terms of what does it mean by refugees. And again, telling people who are privileged to come as refugees. I mean, they're not being persecuted in this country. They're not being ethnically cleansed in any way whatsoever, like the people in Gaza. And given Trump's statement on claiming American ownership of Gaza, that's another story on its own. But again, looking at the global south and this impunity with which Donald Trump is acting, he's like a runaway train without brakes at this point in time. Executive order after executive order that he is signed as well. And, again, you mentioned find alternatives and call his bluff. And let's just talk a bit about those alternatives and more so from the global south in holding Donald Trump accountable for the statements that he's making.
Well, in fact, that's what's behind the whole Article 6 campaign, because we have identified, let me sort of preface this by saying that the Article 6 campaign isn't specifically designed to, how to say this, sort of single America out. America has singled itself out by their own behavior. What we are interested in is international law being applied. We're interested in equality before the law by every nation, that every nation should be under the law, not above the law. But America has acted above the law ever since 1945, ever since the establishment of the United Nations. And we have identified that the source of their power, for lack of a better word, the source of their power, what has enabled them to run rampant across the globe, across the global south, has not been their actual power. Their actual power hasn't been their economic power. It hasn't been their political power. It hasn't been their military power. What has enabled them to act this way has been their impunity. And it is an impunity that they have secured for themselves by their domination of the United Nations. And that if they can be removed, and rather I should say when they are removed from the United Nations, then they will cease to be above the law and they will be under the law like everyone else. And they will be subject to the law like everyone else, because the way that they have operated was that international law is something that only ever applies to their enemies, to their victims, or to their perceived enemies or victims, or who they want to take from, who they want to colonize, who they want to exploit. This is their very, very selective application of international law, and it has never applied to them. So what we're actually, at the core of the Article 6 campaign is a call for justice, is a call for equal justice for all nations, with no one having impunity, no one having unaccountability, and no one being above the law. And it just happens to be the case that the most persistent violator of the principles of the United Nations Charter, the most persistent, the most consistent, and the most insistent violator of the principles of the UN Charter just happens to be the United States of America. If it was Cuba, then we would call for Cuba to be removed from the United Nations. If it was China, then we would call for China to be removed. If it was any other country that had so persistently violated the principles of the UN Charter with impunity, then we would call for that country to be expelled. But it just happens to be the case that America has proven itself to be, over the last 8 decades or so, to be the chief violator of the UN Charter, the chief violator of international law, and the abuser of the entire international legal system, the entire international system of justice, until we've reached a point that no one even takes the concept seriously. No one even takes the concept of international justice seriously. All of these institutions of international justice, whether it's the ICJ or the ICC or the United Nations or any the World Court, anything, even the concept of international law has lost all credibility, because it's never applied to the country that everyone has suffered at their hands. It has never been applied to the country that is the chief violator of international law, which just makes the whole concept of international law and international justice lose all credibility. So we've identified that the source of America's power, again, for lack of a better word, the source of their power, the enabler of their savagery, the enabler of their brutality, the enabler of their global oppression, has been their impunity. And so we've determined that the best way to solve that problem is to remove that impunity from them so that then they will be subject to the law.
Yes, let's just bring Imane into the discussion. Imane, just following up from what Shahid is saying and talking about the United States being the greatest threat to global peace and security. We've heard about the United States breaking every single UN law within the UN Charter. And the key issue here is, as long as the United States of America is a part of the United Nations, we are witnessing that the world will never see global peace, security, justice, call it what you may. And this obviously is a matter of concern. And just talking about invoking Article 6 of the UN Charter and why is this central to the campaign's objective, Imane?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for having me. So Article 6 of the United Nations Charter says verbatim, a member of the United Nations which has persistently violated the principles contained in the present charter may be expelled from the organization by the General Assembly upon the recommendation of the Security Council. And this is central to our campaign, as we would like to see a world that isn't being abused and controlled by the United States of America. We know that they have been, and I will use a key word here, persistently violating the Charter of the United Nations, international laws, and international conventions. Just looking at the article, the United States meets the requirements to be expelled from the United Nations. But as we've delved into many of their violations of the Charter over the decades, it has become clearer than ever that the United States of America cannot peacefully coexist with every other member state in the United Nations, since they have built their empire on the bloodshed of the world and their own people through the hijacking of the United Nations. And we feel that we cannot continue to allow the United States of America to break and undermine international law. We can actually set morality aside for a second and just focus on the fact that the United States of America is in breach of all their contracts and promises. They violate Articles 1, 2, 55, 56, and 73 of the United Nations Charter as a matter of foreign policy, and they have never not been in violation of international law, the Geneva Convention, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination. Thank you.
Yes, and also, Imane, when one looks at the United States of America treating the entire world with disrespect, with disdain as well, and also withdrawing from forums like the Paris Charter, the World Health Organization, the UN Human Rights Council. We've heard recently the ICJ, the ICC has come under the radar as well. Sanctions against the staff of the ICC prosecutor, economic, travel sanctions. All of this actually puts together tells us that the United States, obviously on a global level, in fact, calling itself the only superpower in the world, but again, total disregard, total disrespect for global institutions. Imane?
Absolutely. The United States of America does not respect anybody else in the world, and what they've done is they have built their empire again. They've built it on the disrespect of the world. They've built it on the bloodshed of everybody else, and they've built it without any regards for anybody else, because it's always about American interests. And we see this in the United Nations when they've hijacked the United Nations through their veto. We've seen that the genocide in Gaza has been a genocide by American veto. We've seen that they've completely disregarded global majority votes, where there's been more than 150 countries voting yes for a ceasefire, and they completely disregard that by vetoing that as well. So of course the United States of America does not have any regard for any member state in the entire world. They have no regard for anybody except themselves to be able to expand their own country and expand their own interest and expand their own empire.
Yes, Taufeeq, bringing you into the discussion, and obviously looking at your organization, and there are many other NGOs that play in lobbying member states to take decisive action in invoking Article 6. Now, just looking at some of the strategies that have been proven to be effective in influencing diplomatic decisions when it comes to these type of issues and matters.
Assalamu alaikum and hello to everybody. I would firstly like to say that Nelson Mandela once said that our freedom is not complete without the freedom of the Palestinian. South Africa has always been on the forefront for democracy and the right and the fight for self-determination. We, as South Africa, must take advantage of the freedom of speech as well as the multitude of origin in our laws, as well as ethnic races, as well as that diversity in our approach, in where we may now be the forefront of Africa in fighting and taking the change forward. I mean, the Freedom Charter is a very unique document, and I mean, I think this year is the year we actually celebrate the Freedom Charter, and it's quite a central point in basically ironing out all the differences in terms of the religious factors, the economic factors, and basically we're now able to deal with the factors of humanity and simplify things. So basically, I would actually say South Africa is the focal point and the best part to actually head the struggle.
Yes, and Nisa, just coming back to you, talking about South Africa leading the struggle. We've seen the South Africa leading the case to the ICJ. And Dr. Naledi Pandor actually made this comment about reforming international institutions. And I think, again, what we are talking about, Article 6 as well, and look at South Africa, our position and distancing itself from the West. Is South Africa ready to distance itself? Because these are some of the strategies and solutions that Brother Shahid spoke about earlier in his discourse.
The Global South with South Africa is playing a key role in the shift where the Global South as a whole is rising. So as nations across Latin America, across Africa and Asia assert their independence, the old world order is scrambling to maintain that control. This is what you are seeing right now with the United States of America targeting South Africa. So South Africa isn't cutting ties immediately, at least for now. We are diversifying our control. So for decades, South Africa has maintained trade relations with the United States, and it still does, because mutually beneficial trade serves both sides. So this is about sovereignty. But here's the problem: America doesn't like that. And the United States is 100% import reliant on several key minerals, many of which are directly from South Africa. 83% of America's chromium, which is critical for stainless steel and aerospace, come from South Africa. 66% of its platinum imports, essential for auto and tech industries, comes from South Africa. 50% of zirconium imports used in nuclear reactors are sourced from South Africa. And yet, despite this clear dependence, America continues to pressure South Africa over its foreign policy, whether it's ties with Russia or Iran, as mentioned in the executive order, BRICS, or taking Israel to the ICJ for genocide in Gaza. And why is that? Because South Africa refuses to submit. And the US, like I said, is scrambling to keep South Africa in check, because we do have the potential, and we are, especially in Africa, we are leading when it comes to economics, when it comes to culture, many other things. South Africa is leading, especially on the African continent. But we also see that the world is changing. Economic threats and political pressure doesn't carry the same weight anymore. So South Africa has options like BRICS nations. BRICS nations, or the BRICS bloc, has moved beyond just an economic bloc. We see them coordinating and collaborating in terms of sports, cultural things. We see them on different aspects, not just the economic sector. So since 2017, BRICS trade has increased by 70%, worth 830 billion rand in 2022 was garnered. Investments from China, Russia, India, and so forth are expanding infrastructure, energy, and manufacturing. And South Africa is strengthening ties with SADC, African Union, the African Continental Free Trade Area, which boosts intra-African trade and reducing dependence on Western markets. Now, like I said, United States of America sees this, and they know that our dependence as South Africa on them to purchase or buy from us is lessening when it comes to them, and they don't like that because that means their leverage is now being depleted. So the message is clear from the United States of America. If they play hardball, South Africa will just move away entirely. That's a given. We can see by the statements that our politicians are making that they're not concerned with they do address it, but they're not scrambling to fall in line with what Trump and Musk says. So if America pulls back, BRICS is ready to step in. It's already stepping in any case. So even if Western markets impose restrictions, new markets will open up. And so this South Africa isn't begging to stay in the Westwood books. Our politicians make this clear. We will continue trade and where it benefits us, but on our own terms. And if United States of America is not happy with that, we are making strategic partners within BRICS and the Global South. So I think South Africa is almost ready or could be ready as long as we have those other strategic partnerships in place. And we have the opportunities to do that. We are one of the leaders in BRICS. So yes, we are on our way.
Yes, shukran for that, Nisa.
Sorry, with regards to what you...
Yes, I will just bring Shahid into the discussion. Brother Shahid, what is also interesting to note is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted in 1948. And it was in 1948 that the Nakba had actually taken place. And one of the issues that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights speaks to is representing the commitment to dignity and justice for all people. And this obviously leads to my next question to you in terms of this campaign in invoking Article 6. How do you see this campaign impacting global governance and the credibility of international law, considering the fact that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights does not even speak to what we see happening around us, the injustices, the oppression that is taking place?
Well, I think that the campaign, as I was sort of alluding to earlier, the campaign, when successful, inshallah, will restore credibility to the concepts of international law and international justice, because the domination of the UN by the United States, the persistent violations of the United States, of the UN Charter and of international law without consequences, without accountability, with full impunity, this has bankrupted the concept of international justice, and it has bankrupted those very precious documents like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which have never been applied to Western crimes. We consider, of course, the Nakba to be a Western crime. This is a crime of Western colonization, and it has never been applied when America or its allies have committed these types of crimes. And this has completely discredited the whole concept of international law and international justice among the global population, because the majority of the global population, of course, is not Western, is not white, is not in the global North, is in the global South, and they have been the victims of America, victims of American foreign policy, victims of exploitation, colonization, and so forth from the West. So when they see, there was, a moment in 1945 and 1948 when they signed that document, when they created the United Nations, there was a moment when everyone thought, well, maybe it's over now. Maybe the suffering and the enslavement and the exploitation and the oppression, maybe it will end now because we've got these legal documents. But no one understood at that time that the people who drafted those documents never had the slightest intention of having those documents applied to them. That their intention was that those documents would only ever be used against their victims, against the oppressed, against the global South, against the colonies, and so forth. So I believe that when we get the United States expelled from the United Nations, we would restore the credibility of not just the United Nations, but of even the entire concept of international law, international justice, to show that we don't actually have to have a completely hypocritical system. We don't actually have to tolerate these double standards. We don't actually have to tolerate any country being above the law. We can actually have equal justice. These are things that aren't empty, but they have been drained of their meaning by America's domination of the UN. And I think that we would see, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, once America is expelled from the United Nations and is then held accountable by the United Nations for its 8 decades of crimes, for its 8 decades of violations. I mean, this is one of the reasons why they're so hostile to the ICC. This is one of the reasons why they're so hostile to the ICJ, because they know they're supposed to be on the dock. They know perfectly well that they're supposed to be on the dock. They're supposed to be prosecuted for like I've talked about many times. If we were to go to any country in the world, any country, even in the West, even in Europe, we could find America violating the UN Charter, violating international law against that country persistently from 1945 until today. You could literally throw a dart at a global, at a map of the world, and anywhere it lands, you'd be able to make a case for persistent violations. So America knows very well that they are eligible for prosecution for crimes against humanity, for war crimes, and for many, many other violations of international law. So the fact that we have all endured that for 8 decades without ever seeing any accountability, without ever seeing any consequences imposed upon the chief criminal, that has caused a great deal of pessimism, a great deal of cynicism, and a great deal. I mean, we see it all the time when we do live streams about the Article 6 campaign, and we get many comments from people who say the United Nations is worthless, international law doesn't matter, international law is a joke, the United Nations is a joke, America can never be removed from the United Nations, America is too powerful, it's too strong, and so on and so on and so on. This is what it's done to people psychologically. This is how it has affected people psychologically, and how demoralized people are with the concept of justice, with the concept of international justice, with the idea that the nations of the world can actually come together and run the affairs of this planet by consensus. But we see it happening in the General Assembly. We see all of the 193 countries in the world coming to a consensus on every issue. You hardly ever see any vote at the United Nations that goes 50-50, or where everybody in the General Assembly takes a different view. It always comes down to a consensus, and that consensus is consistently overruled by the United States. So there isn't actually, in reality, there's no reason to believe that international justice is a fraud. There's no reason to believe that it's a hoax. There's no reason to believe that it's impossible for there to be international law or for there to be justice globally. You have to identify the actual reason why we have not had that until now. And the reason that we haven't had that until now is that the United States has dominated all of the institutions that are charged with the enforcement of international law. So I think that once we get them removed, we will see a huge change in not only the practical application of international law and the practical enforcement of international law, but we will see a huge change in the sentiments of the population, where people will actually feel that justice actually is achievable. When they see America at the dock, when they see America suffering the consequences of their actions, suffering the consequences of their 8 decades of violations of the UN Charter, when they see justice actually being applied, that's when people can start to believe in justice again. But the fact that we haven't seen justice applied, and the only time that we've ever seen so-called justice applied is when it has been applied against America's enemies, when it has been applied against America's victims. That's the only time that we've ever seen it. And they've even said as much, that the International Court is actually for them, meaning people in the global South, meaning enemies of the West, designated hostile enemies of the West. That they've actually said it, that this is what the court is supposed to be for. It's not supposed to be for Westerners. It's not supposed to be for white people. It's not supposed to be for America. But it is. It's for everyone. It's for anyone who violates international law. And so once you see it actually applied equally, then people can start to have to restore their belief in the concepts of justice.
Yes, but also, Brother Shahid, just as a follow-up question, why not expel Israel from the United Nations? Why only the call for America's expulsion? And also, just taking a look at some of the other permanent members, for example, Russia or China, these are countries that have also committed violations.
Okay, sure. Let me start with Russia and China. Russia is relatively new in terms of it being as a member, because it was formerly the Soviet Union. For the majority of time that the United Nations existed, it was the Soviet Union. So that has now ceased to exist. But Russia itself certainly has violated the UN Charter. China has violated the UN Charter, but have they done it persistently? Have they done it persistently and consistently and insistently? This is what the Article 6 requires. This is the criteria. Not just that you violate it. I don't think you could find any country that hasn't violated it to one extent or another, or any way that could be interpreted to have violated it convincingly. But China and Russia have not violated it persistently. Meaning, if you look at the violations committed by the United States, like I've said, you could go decade by decade, and just in one decade, you could find persistent violations in terms of the scale of their violations. In other words, it isn't just one violation in one country, it's multiple violations in every country, in every decade of the United Nations existence. And we talk about many of the examples of the violations of the UN Charter by America in our live streams. And I would invite everyone to join us on those live streams so that you can get more information. We won't have time to go into all of it today because, again, the violations are simply too many to list. So why we would not target China or Russia for this is because they don't qualify, just basically in terms of the quantity of their violations. Now, with regards to Israel, there's no question that morally Israel is qualified. There's no question that legally Israel is qualified for expulsion from the United Nations. There's no question about it. But all of Israel's crimes are American crimes. All of Israel's crimes are American crimes. There's not a single thing that Israel has done to violate international law, to violate the principles of the UN Charter that hasn't been enabled by America, that hasn't been funded by America, and where America hasn't provided cover for Israel at the United Nations Security Council. The genocide that we have all been witnessing for the last 15 months has been a genocide by veto, because there should have been a ceasefire from the beginning. But who vetoed it? America vetoed it again and again and again. All of Israel's crimes are America's crimes. If you solve the problem of American impunity and American global violence, you will already solve the problem of Israel. Now, that's just from a basic moral understanding, but from a practical strategic understanding, trying to expel Israel from the United Nations is a non-starter. Strategically, practically speaking, it's not something that can happen for the same reason that you couldn't get a ceasefire, because America will veto it. If we try to expel Israel from the United Nations, America will veto it before we even get the paper submitted. So practically speaking, it's not something that can be done. It's a non-starter. There's no question that legally they are eligible for expulsion. They should be expelled. Morally, there's no question about it. But practically speaking, it's unachievable. And furthermore, I would say that as I just said, all of their crimes fall at the feet of America. All of their crimes are in America's file, the file that will be that we will be presenting, inshallah, when a member state raises Article 6 to the UN Security Council. All of Israel's crimes, all of the file of Israel's crimes will be in America's file, because all of those crimes have been enabled by, have been funded by, have been armed by, and have had cover provided for them by the United States. Israel and America are one entity. Israel is nothing but America's policy in the Middle East, or anyway, that's what it has been, at least since the establishment of Israel, at least since the establishment of the United Nations. So you're solving the Israel problem by the removal of the United States, because then they won't have their big brother anymore at the Security Council to veto them, to veto any action taken against them, to hold them up above international law, because the global consensus has always been on the side of the Palestinians, meaning the global consensus has always been on the side of justice. And Israel is not capable of standing up against the entire global community. they're only able to do what they have been able to do because of American backing. So once America is expelled from the United Nations, then Israel will be subjected to international law, and they will have to comply.
Yes, and let's just move on to Imane. And Imane, there is this debate that always goes on with regard to either scrapping the United Nations altogether, then opting to reform it. And Imane, I just need your thoughts on why not get rid of the UN altogether rather than trying to reform it.
Yeah, well, the idea of dismantling the United Nations altogether has been suggested many a time, but reforming it is much more practical for several reasons. The United Nations has a comprehensive infrastructure and specialized agencies like the ILO, the ICJ, and the WHO that address critical global issues. It is most inclusive. It is the most inclusive international organization representing almost every single country and providing a unique platform for global dialogue and consensus building. While the United Nations has been undermined by powerful member states like the United States of America, there is potential for positive reform by addressing sources of corruption and manipulation. So abolishing the United Nations would or could create a power vacuum in global governance, leading to increased chaos and conflict. The United Nations performs many useful functions, such as peacekeeping, disaster relief, and promoting human rights, and is essential for maintaining international peace and security. Historical lessons such as the failure of the League of Nations highlight the dangers of abandoning international organizations without effective replacements. The League's dissolution contributed to the outbreak of World War II, emphasizing the need to improve existing institutions rather than dismantling them. Many people say BRICS should just start their own United Nations, when basically all of the BRICS member states are actually in a group called Group of Friends in defense of the United Nations Charter. So they are here to defend the United Nations Charter because they also believe that the United Nations can be reformed. So the Article 6 campaign aims to address these issues by holding accountable those who undermine the United Nations principles, paving the way for a more effective and just international organization. So to put it in very simple terms, you don't throw out the rules if one person keeps breaking them. You hold that one person accountable, otherwise the only person you are benefiting is the rule breaker. Dismantling the United Nations will only benefit the United States of America. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Imane. We're going to go for a quick break, but Nisa, just for something for you to think about while we are heading for the ad break is you mentioned financial aid being used as a weapon. And again, when we're talking about dismantling or collapsing the United Nations, isn't the USA the biggest funder of the UN, and wouldn't expelling the USA collapse the UN? So just something for you to think about when we come back from the break. You can answer this.
Imagine a world where every child feels loved, secure, and cared for. At Beit Halima Saadia Orphanage, we are not just providing a roof over their heads, we're giving orphan children a chance for a brighter future. For just 1,500 rands a month or 18,000 rands a year, you can sponsor an orphan and transform their life. Your contribution covers essentials like food, clothing, tuition, therapy, and more, ensuring they grow in a nurturing, supportive environment. Any donation is accepted, as well as daily scheduled donations. EFT directly into our account. Beit Halima Saadia Orphanage, First National Bank, account number 6313-1080-078, branch code 250737, section 18A registered. Take this step today. Contact Sister Nazarene at 083-653-5669 or email info@bhscycc.co.za.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, bakkies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
As heavy snow and bitter winds descend on Gaza, Afghanistan, and Lebanon, hundreds of displaced and refugee families struggle to survive the winter. Without adequate shelter or clothing, the harsh weather threatens lives. Donate towards AMA's Winter Rescue Campaign to provide the food, fuel, and shelter needed by families in Gaza, Lebanon, and Afghanistan to survive the elements and provide warmth to those in need.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success. Searching for elite local and international investment and advisory services from an award-winning firm? Look no further than the Belmont Mayer Group, your gateway to unparalleled investment and wealth management. At Belmont Mayer, we believe in the art of wealth creation, a meticulous process fueled by our unwavering commitment to excellence. With a focus on providing elite alternative investments and quality advice, we also pride ourselves on maximizing value for our esteemed investors, as seen through our consistent outperformance. Your financial success is our top priority. Join us at Belmont Mayer and experience the difference firsthand. Ready to embark on a journey of greatness? Contact us today. Reach out to the Belmont Mayer Group on 078 786 1698. Call or WhatsApp or email us at info@belmontmayer.com. Elevate your financial future with Belmont Mayer, where every detail matters.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Well, we continue with the broadcast this evening with my guests, Nisa Bardien, Shahid Bolsen, Taufeeq Hussein, Imane Laymoonti, and we're hoping Fairouz Nagia will be able to join us shortly. And we are talking about this unholy trinity, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Afriforum versus South Africa Incorporated, but also extending this discussion to the expulsion of the United States of America from the United Nations. Nisa, the question I had raised with you before we went on the break, in terms of the United States of America using its financial muscle, using financial aid as a weapon. And again, is there a risk of the UN collapsing with the expulsion of the US?
Thank you so much. This is a very important question. So, the United States loves to boast about its financial contributions to the United Nations, painting itself as the backbone of global diplomacy. But the truth is that it's a delinquent payer, late, unreliable, and perpetually in arrears. So, based on its gross national income, the United States should be covering 27% of the United Nations regular budget. But over 30 years ago, their Congress conveniently capped that contribution at 25%. So ensuring that the United Nations will always be shortchanged. And on top of that, America seldom pays even the full amount or on time. And the result is that the United Nations is forced to function with a financial noose around its neck. Meanwhile, America's so-called contributions serve more as leverage rather than support. So distributed strategically to manipulate global decisions. And it's not funding, it's control. Take January last year, the United States was 3 years behind on its payments, on the verge of losing its voting rights. But when the moment came to act, America made a partial payment, not to uphold the United Nations mission, not to support global stability, but to secure its veto against a ceasefire on behalf of Israel. Now, this isn't leadership. It's a ransom. America isn't the United Nations' biggest financial supporter. It's the United Nations' biggest hostage taker. Think of it as a mafia operation where United citizens are forced to pay protection fees through taxes, yet the government delivers nothing but global instability in return. So the truth is very clear. The United States doesn't fund the United Nations to strengthen it. It funds just enough to keep it under control while dodging its own obligations to the world. And in fact, United States of America owes about 1.1 billion rand to the United Nations. That is just the arrears, not the annual payment.
Yes, Nisa, in fact, thank you for that. And I see Fairouz Nagia has joined us. Fairouz, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam, brother Inayat. Shukran for having me on today.
Afwan, and wonderful that you're able to join us. I will come to you just now, Fairouz, and also to Taufeeq as well, just to talk about certain legal arguments and also Taufeeq from an NGO perspective, what could some of the issues be that could possibly deter South Africa and also in terms of NGOs supporting these initiatives. But just coming back to Imane again, and Imane, clearly there is a process to follow. There are certain steps, there are milestones that will be required to invoke Article 6 and to successfully expel a member state from the United Nations.
Yeah, so the invocation of Article 6 actually consists of 4 steps. You have the performing grassroots support with 100,000 signatures, lobbying member states, invoking in the Security Council, and then in the General Assembly. And so as we finalize getting the last remaining necessary signatures on our petition, we've actually moved on to the second phase of our campaign, working with diplomats to finding a country that will be willing to take this to the Security Council and be the representative of the Article 6 campaign moving forward within the United Nations, obviously. We've also been working on gathering evidences of the United States of America's persistent violations of the United Nations Charter, and we'll continue to do so until it's time to actually invoke Article 6 in the Security Council. And so if this invocation of Article 6 actually passes in the Security Council with a majority vote, it will be now taken to the General Assembly and will be up to the world's member states to see to it that the US is no longer a part of the United Nations and so no longer able to abuse its power.
Well, Imane, in fact, just staying with you and from what you are describing in terms of steps and milestones and processes and procedures to be followed, this is quite a process. And, once again, when one looks at South Africa and the case that was taken to the ICJ as well, it was an entire process. So this is obviously there's a lot of work that is actually required in the background to actually build this case for invoking Article 6 and the expulsion.
Well, yeah, of course it's going to be a lot of work. This is a diplomatic solution for us. And we are willing to take that work upon ourselves. We are willing to go that extra mile to be able to have world peace. I mean, you don't think that world peace would happen with minimal effort, obviously. So, yeah.
Well, definitely, but also I think Shahid, just to bring you in, and then I'd need obviously I would love Fairouz to actually comment as well, looking at some of the legal arguments and challenges. But just from your side, taking a look at some of the legal and procedural matters that may possibly, risk this initiative or block the expulsion of the US from the United Nations. What happens next?
Okay, well, the Article 6 is quite clear. What is called for in Article 6 is quite clear. So that's not an ambiguous issue. Where we will potentially, what we are expecting, what we potentially will face by the United States, what the measure that they will take will be to challenge their right to veto Article 6, because as a Security Council member, they technically have the right to veto it. However, if we are able to frame the invocation of Article 6 within the framework of a dispute, then Article 27 of the UN Charter can be invoked, can be used, which states that no member state, even if they're on the Security Council, no member state is allowed to vote in a matter, in a dispute in which they are a party. So if Article 27 is invoked, then America would not be allowed to veto the invocation of Article 6. So what America will try to do is to say that this is not a dispute. This is an independently raised resolution calling for the expulsion of America, and they have every right to veto that measure. This is where this is really the only thing that they have legally, as far as I'm aware, this is the only thing that they have legally to try to save themselves, which is to play a game of interpretation, play a word game of how this is going to be interpreted, whether or not Article 6 can be framed as a dispute between the member state that raises Article 6 or the group of member states that raise Article 6, whether it can be framed as a dispute between that member state or those member states and America. This is the question. Otherwise, they will try to frame it as an independent resolution that they have a right to veto. And we have the only reason why this is an issue is because there's no precedent, because there isn't a precedent to the invocation of Article 6. There hasn't been a member state that has been expelled from the United Nations. So the fact that there's no precedent means that there is no precedent interpretation of Article 6 and of Article 27 with regards to framing Article 6 as a dispute. But I don't think that it should be terribly difficult to actually frame the invocation of Article 6 as a dispute, particularly if it is raised by a member state or by a group of member states who have suffered persistent violations by the United States. But other than that, what they can try to do is, and what they have tried to do, in my opinion, is to try to derail the call for the invocation of Article 6 by suggesting half measures that would hopefully, in their hope, satisfy the Article 6 campaign, meaning concessions like, let's just talk about reform. Let's talk about reforming the veto power or removing the veto power. Let's talk about adding some Global South countries to the Security Council, even though they mentioned, I think, adding two African countries unnamed, saying that they should be on the Security Council, but they wouldn't have veto power. So they would basically just be the same as temporary members of the Security Council, except that they would be permanent rather than rotating, but they wouldn't have any more power than an observer. So trying to come up with sort of concessionary measures, half measures that makes it look like they're interested in the United Nations working properly, hoping that that will derail the campaign and satisfy us, so that they can avoid the actual issue of expulsion being raised at the Security Council. Then, of course, the other issue, the other danger is that you have two other members on the Security Council who have historically more or less operated as two extra seats for America, meaning France and the UK. The UK and France sit on the Security Council, and they could potentially veto it. If we successfully argue that it is a dispute and America is forced to abstain from that vote at the Security Council, then they will rely upon the UK and France to veto the invocation of Article 6. In my opinion, the relationship between the UK and France and America is not what it has been historically. And I think that that is increasingly the case under Donald Trump, where everyone can see in Europe, across Europe, whether it's in France or the UK, or certainly in Germany or any other European country, they can see that Donald Trump is approaching his former allies, America's former allies, and you should refer to them really as former allies, not as allies, is approaching them with hostility. He's saying that no one really is safe from America's domination, in saying that, for example, he's going to take Greenland even by military force if necessary. This is regarded by the EU correctly as a direct military threat by America against the EU. Not to mention the policies that have been forced upon Europe with regards to Russia in order to be in alignment with America's obsession over the Ukraine has caused severe economic dilemmas, economic catastrophe across Europe. Germany is in a state of deindustrialization. The continent is becoming destabilized. The costs of energy are skyrocketing. Inflation is skyrocketing. They're being forced to become an energy dependency of the United States. So I think that across Europe, and you know that France has been talking a lot recently about so-called strategic autonomy, that they need to be, actually, they need to have some kind of autonomy, which frankly, it's embarrassing to begin with that France even has to try to justify talking about autonomy. It's supposed to be an independent country anyway, but they're talking about trying to have strategic autonomy, which shows that they understand that the interests of the United States are not their interests, and they are seeing themselves, their influence, France I'm talking about, their influence across the global South is in retreat. Their influence across the global South is in decline, and they're worried about that, and they should be. You know, they lost their influence in Mali, in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Senegal, in Chad, on and on. So they're interested, and they should be interested in trying to repair their relationship with the rising nations and not with a declining nation. They should be interested in repairing their relationship with the BRICS nations and with the global South generally. And the same goes for the UK. The UK, there's no reason why they should be dependent upon oil and energy from America, and there's no reason why France should be dependent upon that. And I think that they will increasingly see that their former ally, which, I mean, we don't have enough time to go into it here, really, but the history of the relationship between America and France is actually, frankly, quite deplorable, and the history between America and the UK is quite deplorable. If you look at how they behaved after World War II and how they basically entrapped all of those countries in the Bretton Woods project that forced them to trade in the dollar. So I think that that across, obviously across the global South, but I think even in France and even in the UK, we have every reason to believe that they might be in a process of redefining their relationship with America. If they have any sense, that's what they're doing. So I don't think it's a given that they will vote in the Security Council on the issue of Article 6 in accordance with their historical habit. I think that they might understand that it's in their interests to actually see the United States expelled from the United Nations, especially when we bring the case at the United Nations along with the voluminous evidence of American violations. And let me just clarify why that would be an issue and why that would be an incentive for France and the UK to try to go along with the expulsion of America, because both France and the UK themselves also have committed voluminous violations over the course of their history of colonization, their history of colonialism, their history of imperialism, and so forth. They have a very bad reputation. They have a very bad record. So throwing America under the bus is potentially a way for them to cleanse their own image and cleanse their own name and try to prove to the world that they actually do care about international law. So I think that depending upon how we lobby, depending upon how we present it, and if we're able to, for example, recruit the support of UN member states who are economically important to the UK and to France, there's every reason to believe that the UK and France will not necessarily vote according to America's interests, but according to their own interests, which if it's according to their own interests, then they would support the expulsion of the United States.
Yes, Shahid, and let's bring Fairouz into the discussion. And Fairouz, certainly this is ground-breaking stuff that we're talking about. We're talking about history in the making. And, with what Shahid is saying, there is no legal precedent or otherwise at this point in time. And just looking at it purely from a legal perspective, in terms of legal arguments to motivate the expulsion and the invoking of Article 6. What sort of challenges do you anticipate at the United Nations regarding the invocation of Article 6? And again, preparation is absolutely important. As Imane had mentioned as well, there's a lot of hard work that lies ahead. So preparation is crucial to be able to address some of these challenges.
Yes, shukran for that, Brother Nya. I agree with Brother Shahid 100%. I think a lot of the, the challenges will really will be focused around that definition of what the dispute is. It is a two-step process. Firstly, as was said before, the United Nations Security Council has to make that recommendation to the United Nations General Assembly. You need 7 affirmative votes in order to ensure that that particular vote or recommendation goes through. And I do think it's going to be, as he said, centering on whether the country is pushing for what we want. That particular recommendation will say it is a dispute, and as was pointed out, America will largely veer towards saying it's an independent issue, not related to any particular dispute. Then in the second leg, it will be the United Nations General Assembly under Article 18 that would have to have a 2/3 majority in order to pass or to make a successful decision on the expulsion. And I do believe it's actually going to be very much political rather than, after one looks at the semantics and after one gets through that decision on whether it is a dispute or not, you're going to have to look at how the lobbies are going to be formed. I am not as optimistic around, France or the UK immediately breaking ties with the US. I would be more, I think, having greater faith in the fact that the other lobbies, whatever countries are more aligned to BRICS, having more faith in BRICS and aligning themselves more with that particular vision, the Global South aligning themselves more to that particular vision, creating some kind of power break that the West and the North has had on bodies like the United Nations. So it is going to be a lot about the politics, more so than looking at the legal aspects, because it would be, like I said, the issues of semantics, the fact that there is no, as was pointed out, no precedent for this. It is groundbreaking. So it will be very interesting to see how the lobbies are actually formed. I think from organizational perspectives, it would be useful to get the voices across, to mobilize the citizens of the particular countries, to put pressure on their governments to actually stand for what these frameworks are saying, stand for justice, ensure that there is accountability, because we see that it has only just reinforced hegemonies thus far. It has just established or entrenched the particular, colonized or colonial interests across the globe. And more countries are standing up and saying, look, this cannot be allowed to continue. The citizens of countries are becoming more aware, are becoming more educated. So it is going to be multifaceted. It's not just going to center on what the law says, because the law very often relies on what precedent says. It is very conservative. International law moves at glacial pace generally, although now we've seen so many things happening, unprecedentedly so. So it could be a matter of looking where allegiances end up, looking at the multipolarity of how our international arena has become. So it is quite an interesting space in Naya to see how it's going to unfold.
Yes, Fairouz. And just, we're talking about international law, and Just looking at some of the recent developments with Donald Trump, the actions against the ICJ, the ICC, sanctioning staff, sanctioning the prosecutor, economic and travel sanctions, all of that, would that actually assist from a legal perspective in any way, or possibly even provide some sort of motivation to overcome some of these legal challenges?
It certainly should put pressure. I mean, this whole campaign that we're driving, there's also a concurrent campaign around sanctioning the United States, all goods. The BDS campaign is putting its weight around that as well. I think all of those, and we've seen what has happened in South Africa itself, how instrumental that has been. So from the legal perspective, mobilizing those particular articles in the United Nations Charter around ensuring sanctions to just weaken the hold that these states will have. So these are particular options available to us, and definitely we see that there is a groundswell of support for moving in that direction. So those, I think, widely are recognized as being available to particular countries, and they are pursuing it. As we've seen before the ICJ, the ICC, people are becoming, quite assertive around, this is what we want to see. We want to see accountability. These channels are being used to the fullest. The only problem is, as we've seen with the ICJ, how, how the Ugandan judge had actually voted. We know that not too long afterwards, there was a career boost for that particular judge. These are how these countries work. These are how the political wranglings happen behind the scenes. There are enticements, there are those kinds of things on a political level, which does have an impact legally, unfortunately. But it does become apparent. I think that countries should really be, member states should really be assertive around ensuring that, whatever processes are in place, that these, uncategorically people vote the correct way, that the lobbies kind of push for that particular voting with conscience, so that countries are also more aware that they are being watched. They are being watched by civic organizations in their countries. It's being publicized. Social media has been very instrumental around laying bare what these shortcomings have been in the particular processes, and also calling for greater accountability.
Yes, shukran for that, Fairouz. Taufeeq, I know we've kept you quiet for a very, very long time. But just to bring you back into the discussion and the looking at it from an NGO perspective, looking at civil society in general, and just to look at it from your perspective, not only in South Africa, I want to add, let's talk about the global South. Let's talk about global solidarity movements, global NGOs in terms of supporting this initiative. And like we've seen in the case of the genocide, where we've seen right across the entire world, every major city, NGOs, civil society groups, human rights organizations, all of them have actually come together to make their voices heard on a global level. And let's just talk about, some of these issues. Possibly, could there be any deterrences from supporting this initiative, or can these footprints be actually ground not only nationally here in South Africa, but internationally?
Okay, the first part of I would like to address in terms of this is the political factor at play. Within South Africa, we have within the GNU parties which are pro-Zionist. So that is also counter-revolutionary to our national democratic revolution. It has posed challenges on the ground where people are malinformed in terms of which direction to move in terms of the US or in terms of the other direction, BRICS. And then we have to address the economic factors in terms of foreign investment in our country and how it influences our markets. Then we also have the consumer market in terms of like McDonald's, Coca-Cola. We have property portfolios that are also within our economic sector, which actually play a vital role. On the social level, we have the factors of propaganda, where the masses are malinformed as to what exactly is going on. Then we also have the rise of basically religious leaders, which actually push crazy ideology, which is gives rise to extreme behavior and extremism. But I'm sure if we actually keep to the ball and deal with exactly genocide, scholasticide, ecocide, as well as overall humanity, we can actually keep the masses focused, But I think those are just the factors I would actually highlight for now. We can go into grave detail, but I don't think so if we have time.
Yes, just very quickly from an NGO perspective, and the question that I raised to you in terms of, mobilizing both nationally and internationally to support an initiative like this.
Okay, in terms of what I would actually suggest is, you see, the from a point of view in terms of South Africa, it is the forefront of democracy. Given leaders like Nelson Mandela, who hold stature even in Lebanon currently today, there's even a statue of Nelson Mandela in Palestine. We need to draw on those iconic structures and which are actually present, and reflect on that there, and continue the struggle. As they say, a luta continua. That means the struggle continues. So we have to draw on that there, being as the icon not only for the African continent but to the world. So given, and let's reflect on what Nelson Mandela said in, I think it was in the early 90s when he presented at the New York. He openly said over there that Colonel Gaddafi, as well as Yasser Arafat, are comrades because they made our freedom actually possible. So we must not forget that, and we must reflect on that day today as South Africans, and not forgetting where we had come from. We only have 30 years of freedom, which is basically, so we owe it to these countries to actually support the Article 6, not only for us, but to the world.
Shukran for that, Brother Shahid. As we're heading towards the end of this evening's broadcast, we know, obviously a lot of responsibility is going to be on the part of governments, and particularly to diplomats who are representing these countries. And what would you say to a diplomat from South Africa or any other global South country who may be listening to this conversation, wondering how their government can support this campaign without diplomatic retaliation or even economic pressure from major powers like the United States of America? And just to add to that, we know that there are many global players, major global players. When you look at South Africa, we're part of the African Union. You've got the Arab League, you've got the OIC, we've got South America, and we see what Trump has been doing in terms of sending people back home to those countries, which he calls illegal migrants. You see it's happening in India, it's happened in Brazil. So you've got institutions like BRICS. So there is a whole global impact as a result of what Donald Trump has been doing recently. And again, linking what he's doing right now, what he is saying. You mentioned, he's had a go at the Europeans as well, and how, that linking all of that to governments, to diplomats, and again, getting buy-in from them to support an initiative like this.
Well, I would say that any diplomat in South Africa or in any global South country, you should be well informed about global trends. You should understand better than anyone else. You should be able to identify global trends and what's happening in the world, not just on a the basis of this headline or that headline, or even this administration or that administration. And the fact of the matter is that, as I said at the very beginning, America is an empire in decline. They are an empire that is in retreat. And I would say, for example, with this, what I said in the earlier section, when you were talking about the sanctions against South Africa and the freezing of the aid against South Africa. South Africa is not the only country that they're freezing aid. They're freezing aid all over the world. They're freezing all foreign aid. Even they're putting their own CIA on the chopping block. They're going to do an audit of the Pentagon. and defense and military spending and so forth. All of these are indications that the United States is in retreat. They are in regression. They are withdrawing from their international assets, say, their international interests as a country on a state level. Now, the brother was talking about the businesses and so forth that are in South Africa. I would make I would separate this from the state level, because, like, for example, the money that America is now denying South Africa, it doesn't matter what you do, that money's not coming back. You should understand this. They're coming up with the excuse that it's for this reason or that reason or the other reason, but the fact of the matter is they need the money. That money is not coming back, no matter what you do. If they can get you to comply and to capitulate to whatever demands they might call upon for you to capitulate to, it doesn't matter. That money is not coming back. And the same goes for all of the other countries where they are freezing the aid. The money isn't coming back. They're coming with an excuse. They're coming with a reason to try to make themselves look like it's not just because they're broke, but it's because they're broke. And they're trying to start fights with all of these countries that they're withdrawing from to make it look like those countries are in the wrong, when actually they just can't admit the fact that they can't maintain their empire anymore. This isn't rhetoric. This isn't idealism. This is just a reality. Even Marco Rubio himself, the new Secretary of State, said it himself on an interview recently, where he said that America is no longer the unipolar power of the world. They're no longer the unipolar superpower. The unipolar superpower moment that began with the fall of the Soviet Union, that moment has passed into history. The translation of that is America is a regional power. America is now a regional power. And we are in, as he said himself, the Secretary of State of the United States of America said himself, that we are now in a multipolar world. A multipolar world means that you have the country being, the planet is being divided up into spheres of influence. Spheres of influence that are created around regional hegemons. Regional hegemons, not a single unipolar superpower. Regional superpowers, like, for example, South Africa, like, for example, Nigeria, like, for example, all of the BRICS nations, Russia, China, the GCC, Turkey, Egypt to a certain extent, and obviously the United States. And the United States is primarily interested in the northern, the global north. They're interested in the Western Hemisphere. This is why they're turning their sights on Europe. This is why they're turning their sights against their own previous allies. They're not as interested in maintaining their, as a state now. Remember, I'm making a difference between the state and the private sector. The private sector is a different issue. But on the state level, they're not interested in maintaining this empire globally anymore, because they simply cannot do it. And because of the private sector power, which is now a-national. Private sector power is a-national. I won't say multinational, because it simply doesn't belong to any nation. It floats above borders. The a-national owners and controllers of global financialized capital have global interests, and they are that group of private sector players are from every country in the world. There are South Africans who are in this group of people. I'm not actually, I don't mean to put forward the idea that it's an organized group of people, but it's a shared set of interests that are global, and they are interested also in America receding from its international interference, because the future of the global economy is in the global South. So, for example, if you talk about McDonald's, you're talking about a national private sector power. You're not talking about America. You're talking about a national private sector power. You're talking about when you have these companies in your country, these are not, they're only American on paper. The people who are owning those countries and the shareholders of those countries are global. The shareholders are global, and they are interested in a different kind of economic system, a different kind of political system to what we have all known for the last 50, 60, 100 years. So I would say to a diplomat, you should be aware of this trend. You should be aware of what's actually happening and understand that the risks that you perceive are involved in confronting America, in standing up against America, those risks made sense 30 years ago. That fear made sense 30 years ago, but that timidity is no longer pragmatic. Being timid and being acquiescent was a pragmatic approach in 1995, but not in 2025. Now the world has changed. The global power dynamics have changed. The way that the world is moving, the trends are going in a different direction. And like I said, the center of gravity of the global economy is moving to the south and to the east. You can stand up to America today. You absolutely can stand up to America today. And like Sister Nisa was talking about, South Africa is in an extremely strong and powerful position with regards to the leverage that they have. Now, you've never wanted to use that leverage in the past because you were afraid of making America angry. And you had reason to believe that. You had reason to be afraid of that, but you don't have a reason to be afraid of that anymore. The empire is in retreat. That's just a fact. If you look at at everything that has been going on, and it's not just Trump, it was happening under Biden as well. So I would say to any diplomat, to any politician, to any government official or what have you, who is considering Article 6, there are massive elements within the private sector, powerful elements within the private sector who will not oppose you. And the state, America, their state power has for many, many decades now followed the interests of the private sector. And if the private sector isn't against the invocation of Article 6 against America, then you don't have much to worry about. I mean, you can see Trump is withdrawing from all international obligations. He's withdrawing from all international treaties, international agreements, international organizations. He may even withdraw from NATO. They already withdrew from the Human Rights Council. It's not impossible to conceive that Trump himself would remove the United States from the United Nations even without us invoking Article 6. But in my opinion, the only reason that he wouldn't, and I'm sorry I'm going on so long, but the only reason that they don't want to be removed from the United Nations is exactly because of the power shift, and that the global South is now coming into a position where we can reclaim control or take control. Since we never had control, we can't say reclaim, but we can take control of the United Nations and actually have it work properly. And they don't want it to work properly because they know, as I said before, that they are eligible for prosecution under international law. But I don't think that it's appropriate. I don't think it's wise. I don't think it's pragmatic for any diplomatic personnel or for any government official or for any government in the global South to feel timid today or to feel intimidated today, because the fact of the matter is that America is in retreat. Even if they're shooting in the air, they're shooting in the air while they're running away. So I don't think that you need to lack any confidence in what America may or may not do. You just chart your own course and you can break free from American domination. And in my opinion, there's no question about that.
Yes. In fact, I've got a message that has come through from Ashraf Patel, and I just need to read this message out. This is quite relevant in terms of what we have been discussing, where Ashraf says that the latest cut in US aid and PEPFAR, as well as the Afrikaner land saviorism, could only be derived from the GNU model. The GNU project was heavily supported by the Biden administration and liberals within the ANC. The NED Democracy Conference held in November last year, despite opposition from activists, the genocide supporting of Biden administrations rang on deaf ears by human rights NGOs, Democracy Now!, Section 27, and the Kathrada Foundation. They put money and funding proposals first. Today, they got a royal kick up their backsides by the Trump administration, and deservedly so. Yes, many health projects are suffering, but the U.S. pharmaceutical industry made billions from our COVID procurement. AGOA benefits mainly Agri-SA, white farmer exporters. Yet, in South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa begs and begs. They don't like Africa, but we beg again for them to come to the G20. Really, this is a much needed opportunity for South Africa and Africa to learn self-reliance. They fear China mainly. South Africa is apologizing, not protesting. Why did we not impose tariffs like Mexico? Those were just comments that came through from Ashraf Patel this evening. But what we're going to do right now, and I see obviously Imane is not available, but let's just go around. Taufeeq, just about 2 minutes, just some closing comments.
Okay, I just want to say, in terms of the struggle, we need to keep it in line of democratic values, and we must keep it disciplined in our behavior. we must not allow ourselves to be influenced by factors out there that are of various nature. So we must stick to the struggle of humanity in terms of the Freedom Charter, and we must prioritize its values as it addresses all needs. And yeah, that's about it.
Brilliant. Fairouz, any final thoughts from you?
Yes, I think it's very interesting to look at what is happening with the United States. We have always been taught to look at the money. Where's the money going? And if we look at 1959 right through to 2024, the money has been channeled to this project called the establishment of the Greater Israel area. And I don't think we should lose sight of that, because that project is still ongoing since the inception of AIPAC, since its kind of hijacking of the United States Congress. We have seen the movement of mass funds of weapons going through to Israel to establish this particular project. So that is one thing that I hope we are not going to lose sight of. And at the same time, America's withdrawal of funds could also be a strategy to try and overwhelm countries with their own domestic issues, to try and get them more or less off or distracted from the international scene. So it's kind of smoke and mirrors. I do think it's important to keep a watch where the money is going, where the support is going, and where it's being withdrawn, and what the impacts of that will be, so we don't lose sight of the bigger picture, because that is something that we really do need to keep an eye on. Thank you, Inayat.
Well, shukran for that. Nisa, just some of your closing comments, but also more importantly, in terms of our listeners, our viewers this evening, how can they stay informed and contribute towards this campaign?
Thank you so much. So to the viewers, we ask you to please engage and amplify our campaign. Support us and start writing to your MPs, to your politicians. And this is a global movement, not just in South Africa. This is a global movement where we are coming together to fix things for everybody, every single person. Whether you think you are affected or not, we are being affected. So please call on your politicians to invoke Article 6 of the UN Charter and call for the United States of America to be expelled from the organization. And then also please take action. We've got a petition, sign and share that petition. You can find it on change.org. You can search for the term expel USA from UN or similar keywords. You'll notice that we're close to our target of 100,000, but we're not stopping at 100,000. The more voices we have that we can show the United Nations that there is public backing for this, the better that is. And then also please join our discussions. You can come on Telegram. You can search for the Middle Nation Discussion Group, or Invoke the 6 and join this movement, Invoke the 6, which is the Article 6 campaign. And in those Telegram groups, please come and volunteer your services wherever you feel you can help us. We do need your help, because like I said, it's a global movement. You can come from anywhere in the world. Middle Nation, the people of Middle Nation right now, we all sit in different parts of the world, and we all come together weekly to discuss Article 6 and teach and educate. And right now, partnering up with United for Justice, South Africa. And we are coming together, and you can see the movement is growing. Article 6 is something that we can all stand behind. So please do support our campaign. Thank you.
Well, shukran for that, Nisa. And I've just got another comment that's come through referring to Donald Trump. It says, please call him a wrecking ball and havoc. The orange man is deranged. Well, it's come through from one of our listeners, our viewers this evening. Brother Shahid, I'm going to leave you with the final thoughts.
Sorry, I had a little trouble turning on my mic. My final thoughts is everyone should get out of their mind any pessimism. You should get out of your mind any hopelessness. You should get out of your mind any concept that this isn't something that can be done. That international justice and international global justice and the international institutions of justice cannot function properly. It's not true. We can claim these institutions. There can be equality before the law. There can be a rules-based order in which the rules are being followed by everyone, not being dictated by one and obeyed by everyone else. We can actually have international law applied equally to all nations. But there's only one way that we can ever achieve that, which is to get the you have like in those old cowboy movies when I was growing up in America, You always have these characters in the cowboy movies where it's an outlaw who becomes a sheriff of a town, and he's still an outlaw, but he's got a tin badge. That's what America has done with their Security Council position at the United Nations. It's an outlaw with a sheriff's badge, and the Article 6 campaign is going to knock the sheriff's badge off of his chest and hold him accountable like everyone else. And there's no reason why that can't be done. And if you believe that it can't be done, then this is a symptom of psychological colonization in your mind that has made you have an inflated idea about America's power and America's importance. And I want you to understand that that power and importance never was what you thought it was, but even whatever importance and whatever power that they used to have, they don't have to the same degree now as they did then. So there's no reason whatsoever that this can't be done. And if you have pessimism, if you believe that it can't be done, then that's every reason that you should support it so that you can help to heal yourself from that doubt and from that psychological colonization and be part of the change that can actually bring real justice, international law to the world as we all need. So thank you so much. And I thank you, brother, for hosting us on this platform. And I want to thank all of the team, mashallah, for everything they had to say. And thank the audience for joining us today. Jazakallah khair.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Brother Shahid, and I quite like the analogy of the old Western movies and Donald Trump and the tin badge. It seems like history repeating itself, which is exactly the case. But to all of you, to Nisa Bardien, to Shahid Bolsen, Taufeeq Hoosen, to Fairouz, Nagia, and to Imane Laymoonti, we thank you. We say shukran, jazakallah khair, and to all of you for your time with us this evening here on Salam Media. It's been an absolute pleasure, and obviously looking forward to further discussions. And as this initiative, as things progress, I'm sure from time to time we will catch up. We will get regular updates as well. But for now, we thank you and all the best to all of you, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thanks.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of a special broadcast, I must say. Normally we have these discussions on a Wednesday night, and I'm sure Wednesday night we will be replaying in case you missed out on this discussion. But I must say, an absolutely important, a critical discussion that we have had tonight, considering where we are at this point in time in the world and where do we fit into the greater scheme of things as the United States of America is concerned, for us here in South Africa, but also right across the entire world. And as one of the listeners said, that the orange man is actually creating havoc and totally deranged, which is exactly what the case is, but also with the helps of the likes of Elon Musk and South Africa in particular, again, in terms of the Land Expropriation Act, without understanding all of this put together, tells us that we are in for a huge battle. It's a huge challenge, but again, if we don't support initiatives like this to have Article 6 of the UN Charter obviously invoked on the United States of America, we've seen time and again, over and over again, total disregard, total disrespect for international law, for international institutions. And again, we've seen the devastation, the destruction that it had caused to Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. Again, the United States using its veto powers not to take any action against the Zionist entity called Israel. And we've seen the damage, we've seen the destruction, what it's actually done to the people of Palestine and the Palestinian cause. And I must add, many other causes right across the entire world where human rights, where justice, all of that is actually paramount. So again, let us take this matter very, very seriously. If we care about justice, if we care about upholding human rights, about human values, about upholding international law, let us support this initiative. And with that, I'm going to be leaving you. It's been an absolute pleasure being in your company. And also, once again, to all my panelists this evening, we thank you for your time with us. From myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.